and welcome to today's class, which is all about how to build a squiggly career in business strategy. I'll come back to what the squiggly bit means a little bit later on. Don't worry, you don't need any equipment for this class. It'll just be me talking for the next 20 minutes or so, and hopefully by the end you'll come away with three key things. So the first one being a little bit of insight into what it's like to work in business strategy and brand strategy. The second thing is around understanding a bit more about how you can demonstrate your strategic thinking skills. And the last point is around how you go about building a squiggly career. So the squiggly career term is all about taking a slightly less traditional approach to building your career into some of these more strategic roles. As I said, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on later today. To introduce myself, I'm Rachel. I have worked in business and brand strategy for the last 10 years. I did a BSc in business management at King's College London, and then, as I said, for the last 10 years I've worked in both big corporate companies, so I've worked for the likes of Tesco, Walmart, and I'm currently in the corporate strategy team at Asda, but I've also worked for slightly more entrepreneurial, smaller startup businesses in this space as well. So as I talk through some of the things we're going to discuss today, I'll try and bring a bit of my experience from all of those different roles, and as I say, that hopefully will make a bit more sense when we get to why my career has been so squiggly towards the end. So starting off with a bit of insight into working in business and brand strategy, I thought I'd just start with the obvious really, and what is business and brand strategy? And essentially, business strategy is all about the long-term future position of a business. So in my role currently, and in the various other roles that I've had in business and brand strategy through the years, your primary job is to work on what the vision, mission, and goals of the company are. All of what we do is looking towards the future, and when I say the future, we're talking about the long-term future. So when you work in business strategy, you're typically looking and talking and working on things that are 5, 10, 15 years from now. So it's a very future-facing role. And one that where you are looking a lot towards hypothetical situations, hypothetical problem solving, and planning for the future. Whether you're working in a big corporate company or even a small startup business, as I say, like I have, strategy is always has the same core component, which is every business and brand, whether they are established or starting out, will be working to a long-term vision. And in some strategy roles, a big part of what your job is to help the business and the people that work for that business either establish, or if the vision is already established, and understand what that vision is and how it applies to their day-to-day jobs. What is a business vision? Well, to give you an example from a small company, you might have heard of them, Google. I don't know, not very well known, don't really, small player. To give you an example of what their vision statement is, Google's vision is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful for everybody. So that is, Google as a business, what's their vision? That's ultimately what they are striving for in everything that they do and every decision that they make as a company. Now, underneath every business's vision, there has to be a way that you are going to achieve that vision, and that's often called a mission. And a really easy way to understand a mission is it's effectively how you as a business and as a team are going to achieve that long-term vision. So if you take the Google example, their vision is to organize the world's information. Their mission would therefore be about understanding how they are going to organise the world's information. As I mentioned, when you're working in strategy, you are working in the long term, so 5-10 years ahead of time. Actually, particularly if you work in a very big business, like I do at the moment, it's very difficult to keep your whole business and your whole company aligned to what that longer term vision is, particularly when they're struggling with the sort of day-to-day pressures of their job. So when you're working in strategy, you support a vision, you have a mission, but ultimately you're also responsible for the governance and the structure around making sure that you as a strategy team are supporting the rest of the business in achieving those small goals along the way, that ultimately, you know, the goals this year add up to some goals next year, and all of a sudden all of those goals, milestones, enable you all to collectively achieve that company vision. It's a really varied and interesting job. It's one of the reasons that I love working in strategy, is that because you are responsible for either creating that vision, and once it's created, sort of being the guardian for what that vision of the future looks like. You work across lots of different business functions to help educate and help support those functions in terms of their day-to-day and how that can contribute to the longer term vision. So it's very varied in its nature. You get to work across lots of different disciplines across the business. You get to get involved in, as I say, longer term pieces of work, and then actually more of the sort of project style work where you are helping to support business units answer questions or problems that they need to overcome to achieve that vision. So it's very broad, it's very varied, it can be very fast-paced, because whilst as a strategy team, as I say, your deadline is 5 years from now, you will often be supporting teams and businesses where they have much shorter deadlines on their projects and what they need to achieve, that all cumulatively add up to delivering that overall vision. So that's typically a traditional view of what business strategy looks like. As I mentioned before, I've worked for both big corporate companies in this capacity, but also startup businesses too. And I'd say that the structure and the main objective of the roles is broadly the same. Big businesses have visions. Smaller businesses also have visions, missions. It really depends on sort of how big the teams are and what the company goals and objectives are. But whether you're in a big business or a small business, if you're working in strategy, you are ultimately responsible for helping shape and make sure that everyone involved is on the right track to achieving what your long-term future vision is. So that's a little bit of insight into what business and brand strategy is and what the day-to-day of the role looks like. In terms of that second point, so strategic thinking and how you can demonstrate and apply it. As I mentioned before, I really love working in strategy because it gives you a very broad and varied overview of what's going on in a business or in a brand. So because you are so close to the long-term vision, you have a really holistic view of what's going on. And these types of roles tend to lend themselves better to people who, like me, are a bit of an all-rounder, a bit of a jack of all trades. You're not an expert in one thing. You have an interest in lots of different things, and where you are, that strategic thinking comes into play. Is these roles are really about taking lots and lots of different bits of information from lots of different places and understanding all of those different components and really distilling it down into one key output. Now, often those outputs, as I mentioned before, are framed as questions or problems to solve. So again, these types of roles, and a reason I really like working in strategy is often it's people come to you with big chunky problems that they don't know the answer to, or questions that they've been discussing for a really long time, and they need an independent viewpoint, or somebody like me and my team who have that total business view of what's going on. And they need us to do some analysis to help them understand and think strategically about a problem, as opposed to, you know, these people are often category experts or experts in their field, and they need a little bit of a broader view of what's going on to make the right decision. So, as I say, strategic thinking, how you approach it, there are loads of different ways that you can think strategically. We think strategically about lots of different things in our own life, let alone in a business context. So the key with strategic thinking, from my experience, is to keep your perspective of things really broad. So, as I mentioned, in these types of roles, it's about taking lots of different information and distilling it all down into one single answer. And we talk a lot in my current job about that single answer being the so what. So if you've got a problem or a question, you're responsible for going out and finding out lots of different things about issues or topics related to that problem or question, and then coming back with a single answer that takes into account all those different points. Now, there is a framework that you can use to do that. So we often use something called a SWOT analysis, where you take a problem, question, situation, and you look at, you do a SWOT, and SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And you take all of those different data inputs or bits of information that you have, and you assess them based on strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, what I would say about strategic thinking and how you can really hone your strategic thinking skills is, whilst you can learn lots of different ways of frameworks and ways to approach the analysis, really good strategic thinking comes from being interested in lots of stuff. So as I mentioned before, it really lends itself to people who are jack of all trades. If you, like me, are kind of innately curious and you're not a particular expert in one thing, but you are genuinely quite interested in loads of different things, the best way to hone that kind of way of thinking and develop that skill set is to keep broadening your perspective. So if you are interested in music and art and maths and science and all sorts of different things, that's fantastic. Keep being interested in all of those different things, because from my experience, the more you see and read and understand about different disciplines, strategy is all about an understanding of all those different disciplines, and then applying that knowledge back to the problem or situation that you're in. There is, as I say, the other thing I think that's important with strategic thinking, and again is something that you can practice in your everyday life, not just in the working context, is taking a slightly different stance on things. So people who work in strategy are often people who quite like to debate things or play devil's advocate if you're having a conversation, and something that was I learned very early on in my career is that if you're working on, and in this example I was working on coffee, if you're working on a project to do with the future of coffee, then actually you don't look at coffee for your source of inspiration for the answer. If you're working at coffee, you need to be looking at crisps, fashion, what's going on in technology, what's happening in the economy, all these different factors to really understand what the trends are, what the commonalities are between all of these different industries, and bring all of that information together so that you can apply it back to, in this instance, you know, what have we learned from these other industries that would give us a clue to answer what the future of coffee might be. So strategic thinking, all about being broad, all about being interested in lots of different things, and that ability to absorb lots of information, but actually distill it down to some really simple outputs that really answer that so what of a question or a problem to solve. that really broad outlook and mentality about things brings us really nicely onto Squiggly careers. So as I mentioned before, my route into business strategy has not been the traditional route. So in terms of sort of roles within corporate strategy, once you leave university, you can take a more traditional path and join businesses such as, you might have heard of Boston Consulting Group and PwC and Deloitte and big consulting houses, where you sort of join the business at an entry level and work your way up as you go. I didn't do that. I've taken a much more squiggly approach to my career. And if you want to understand a bit more about the term squiggly career, then there's a fantastic podcast that I'd recommend you listen to. It's called the Squiggly Career Podcast, and a brilliant book written by Helen Tupper and Sarah Ellis, which explains all about this squiggly career principle. And in essence, what it's about is traditionally, if you were to work in businesses or corporate life, your career path, it has been fairly linear. So people of our parents' generations and the generations before that, it was a little bit more certain and laid out in terms of if you studied a certain degree, if you were in a job for a certain period of time, you hit your objectives, then you moved up the next rung of the ladder. And if you did the same again for another couple of years, then you would move up the ladder again. And that's how historically, as I say, people of my generation, my parents' generation, worked for businesses for 10, 20, 30 years. The path was very linear. Squiggly careers is all about actually understanding that, particularly in the world that we live in today, and particularly in roles like mine, I haven't taken that traditional route. And I also don't work in a profession like being a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant, where your career path is set from the moment that you decide to be one of those things. Now that can be quite overwhelming and quite daunting if you don't know what you're doing. And I certainly didn't know what I was doing. But taking a more squiggly approach to your career is all about thinking less around what your job title is and how much does it pay, and what's the next level of promotion, and more about making decisions on future job roles based on your strengths, what you value in life, and actually this idea of less certainty and more possibility. And certainly for my own career, that is how I have built my experience to get to where I've got to today. As I said, I could have got to my role through joining one of the more traditional consulting houses and being trained up through their program and their sort of graduate schemes and things like that. But instead, I chose a bit more of a practical approach. And when I left King's College and I graduated, I wasn't able to get on a graduate scheme. I tried. I thought that was the thing that you were supposed to do when you finished university. But instead, I knew that I was really good at communication, and I was a far more visual person than numbers and commercials. So I played to my strengths, and I didn't know what I was doing, but marketing sounded like a fairly decent place to start, given I liked visuals and words and all of those good things. So it wasn't what I planned, but having not got on a graduate scheme, I just took a job working for Tesco in their marketing team. And to be honest, that kind of set the tone for how I've made decisions over the last 10 years about the different opportunities I've wanted to do, and how I've built my experience up to being in the position that I am today. And I think it's really, it was something that I wish someone had told me a long time ago, that actually you don't need to have a plan. It's quite exciting if you don't have a plan. When I left Tesco, I actually went to work for a completely different business. It was a startup research agency, and I took that job simply because of their job advert. And it's a job advert that to this day is the best one I think I've ever seen, which it simply said, "Are you curious about brands and people?" There was nothing in there about what the job was, how much it paid, you know, all of the things that you expect to consider when taking a job offer. But it really sparked my curiosity and enabled a conversation with my future employer. And actually, by framing that opportunity in the sense of possibility rather than certainty, which, as I said, is one of the key principles of Squiggly careers, actually I gained some fantastic experience going to work for that business. And as I say, really set the tone for, again, how I have decided to take different jobs along the way. For me, it has always been about learning and expanding my experience and skill set, and that's as much been about playing to my strengths, but also playing to what's been valuable to me at that moment in life. And an example of that would be a couple of years ago. I was lucky enough to by chance be given an opportunity to go and work in the US. It was something that I had never planned, or certainly at the time that I was looking for a job, I very much wasn't looking to move to another country and take a temporary job, but traveling and experiencing different places and around the world has always been something that I've really valued. And so whilst it wasn't the best fit for me in terms of my career plan, it absolutely was a fantastic opportunity in terms of doing something that enabled something else in my life that was really important to me. And I took that job. It was a 2-month contract working for Walmart in the US. And again, thinking about Squiggly careers and thinking about things as possibilities, not certainties. Actually, that experience then turned into 2 fantastic years working in the US, and that 2-month job evolving into a couple of other different jobs where I gained more responsibility and more experience along the way. But as I say, it really did come from being open to the possibility and less concerned with kind of the certainty of where and when and you know, what the set path of that career looked like. So as I say, I think Squiggly careers is a fantastic principle and has certainly stood me in really good stead to date. And as I mentioned right at the start, strategy is about having that really holistic view of the world and experience in lots of different disciplines so that you can consider lots of different inputs and make decisions based on that broad perspective of the world. And I think whilst there's absolutely a place for going to one of the more traditional consulting houses and getting a more traditional education of what that looks like, there's equally a lot of value. And as I say, my personal experience, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but I'm really pleased that I took a slightly less traditional approach in how I have built my career over the last 10 years. As I say, I would reiterate, it can be quite scary, and I think hindsight is a wonderful thing. If you'd have asked me 10 years ago, you know, I was terrified that I didn't have a plan and that I didn't really know what I was doing and where I was going. But as I say, for me, the most important thing on that is just starting. And you know, as I say, stick to those principles of what you're good at, what you're interested in, what you value most in life, and actually changing that mindset to be around the art of the possible rather than necessarily always hanging out for absolute certainty. I think in the world that we currently live in, unfortunately, we can't be as certain as we would like to be about some things, but again, see that as a really exciting thing and look at it in terms of what the possibilities might come out of it as a result. So just to recap on the 3 things that we've talked about today. So the first thing was around a bit of insight into what is business and brand strategy. And we talked about 3 things. So if you work in business strategy like I do, you are ultimately responsible for either shaping or making sure that there's governance around the long-term future position of the business. So we talked about businesses having a vision, and a mission, and in roles like mine, helping those businesses set those goals and that roadmap of how they're going to achieve that in the long term. And as part of that, working across lots of different teams within the business. So the role is very varied, and you have to be a bit of an all-rounder in terms of the different skills that you bring to those roles, so that you can educate the business around what that vision is, but also help them in their day-to-day jobs and decision making, that ultimately you are all collectively pulling together to achieve that vision in the long term. The second thing we talked about is strategic thinking and how you can broaden your skills and apply those skills. And that's very much around, as I say, keeping that broad perspective of the world. And that's as much in your personal life as in your working life. So you'll have interests and things that you like to pay attention to, do as much of that as possible, but also broaden the scope to some things that you maybe know a little bit less about. So as I say, I'm a very visual person, but I like to sometimes keep up with what's going in the economy. I love music, but a lot of music is related to a lot of fashion. So I try to keep a sort of a broad scope of what's going on, and what I see and what I read in my everyday life. And I find that a lot of that is really helpful context when trying to understand some of these problems or questions that come up within my working life. And then the last thing we talked about is this idea of a squiggly career. And the key thing to take away from that is not to worry if you don't have a plan. As I said, I didn't have a plan when I graduated from university. And I think whilst that can be really overwhelming, if you really think about sort of changing your mindset in terms of worrying less about job titles and hierarchy, and more about what your strengths are, what your interests are, and what's important to you in life. At the end of the day, we spend a huge amount of our days at work, and if it's not something that means something to you and you're excited and curious to know more about, then actually it's no fun, and you'll do a better job if you're lit up by what you're doing, and that could be in topic, or that could be simply your job allows you to live in a bit more of a flexible way, or you work on something that, if you're really passionate about the environment and your company and what you do relates to helping the environment, just find something that really means something to you in your job, whatever that means. And then, as I say, this final part around swapping your mindset from certainty to possibility. So again, in making decisions about how to build your career, hierarchy is great, status is great, more salary is great, but some of these things can't always be so certain. And certainly the path to progress once you're in some of these roles is definitely not that certain. So switch that mentality from worrying less about the certainty and more about what the possibility of just starting in some of these roles and the experience that you can get in some of these roles might give you. That's it from me. I hope that's been insightful and helpful. If there's any questions, please let the guys at Satchel know, and I'd be more than happy to help and answer any of them. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.